Hi, everyone. This is Please Explain from Montclair Design Week and Radio Free Montclair. This is the show where we've asked you, your friends, and your neighbors to send us questions of things that you've always wondered about your community. And now we've tracked down some folks who could hopefully provide some answers. I'm Scott Gurian. When I'm not hosting the show, I host a podcast called Far From Home, where I look for interesting stories in my travels all around the world. But of course, COVID-19. So I'm here for the time being. And I got to thinking that there's actually really fascinating stories all around us, right in our communities, and right under our feet. We really don't have to go very far to find interesting things that maybe we never knew about or never thought about. So that was my thinking for this show. And each day I've been joined by a different co-host. Today, back again with us is Krystal Persaud. She was with us on Monday. She's here with us again. Krystal, you want to introduce yourself again?
Sure. Hi, I'm Krystal. I'm a designer, entrepreneur, and teacher, born and raised in Bergen County, and I have taught at NGIT in Newark for a number of years. So happy to be here, and I'm excited to see what people ask today.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it as well. And our first question today comes from Montclair resident Loon, who is with us now, I believe. Loon, thank you so much for joining us. And you've lived here for quite a while, or a few years anyway, but there's certain things, I guess, that you don't understand about the town. Is that right?
Yeah, so my husband and I have lived here for, I think, like 3.5 years. And what was so surprising is that actually with the pandemic, we felt like we're starting to learn so much more about local governments, because a lot of the offerings, like town hall meetings and different things, were kind of shifting to a virtual space. And so it's really got me thinking about really just like what actually goes on, behind the scenes. And I just have been wondering a lot about what, like with voting and elections, and what kind of, I guess, goes into all of that, and how is that all connected in ways that maybe even, I've lived here 3.5 years, but maybe there's people who've been here even longer who don't quite understand. So I guess my question, it's just related to what actually goes on, how exactly does the local government work?
And I think you're not alone. I think a lot of people, to the extent that they pay attention to politics at all, maybe they vote in the presidential election every 4 years, maybe they'll vote for members of Congress, but a lot of people don't pay so much attention to, city councilors, school boards, where that's a thing, even the mayoral elections, and they don't quite understand how their local government works. So I think that's a really important question, because those are probably the elections that affect people the most directly and the most immediately.
I think like the last time I learned about local government, I might have been in the 2nd grade, or, some literally something like that. And I think, we're so busy kind of working and taking care of our own lives, you kind of forget that there's this whole infrastructure in your neighborhood. And like, I'm with you. I don't know how it works either.
Well, yeah. I think I've found the perfect person to help provide some answers. We have with us now Jerry Freed, who was a former mayor of Montclair from 2008 to 2012. Thank you so much, Mayor Freed, for joining us.
My pleasure being here, and I'm really happy about Montclair Design Week. And so many of the citizen-generated things in Montclair are so important to the quality of life here.
And how did you get into politics originally?
Well, so I was mayor of Montclair 2008 to 2012, and because of the timing of our local elections, they're held in May. That used to be the law, that places like Montclair have our elections in May, and places like Montclair are nonpartisan municipalities, which means you don't identify as a Republican or a Democrat as a candidate, and you merely have, when you vote, your name and up to 6 words underneath your name, and groups of candidates you choose the same words, which essentially creates a slate, and that's the way a lot of people are elected. In fact, mayoral candidates are probably always on a slate with other candidates, with rare exceptions. And our form of government changed to this particular form in 1980. where the citizens directly elect the mayor. But basically, I ran in 2008. Wasn't a councilman. Wasn't really involved with local government stuff before then. I had been in advertising and film and media, and did it as a passion project because I was a bike and pedestrian advocate. Started Bike and Walk Montclair back in 2002 with a bunch of other citizens, and decided that was a way that I could contribute to the community. So an unusual path for most people in public office.
So give us a brief snapshot of how local government works in Montclair.
Well, okay, I think the real significant things for people to know, I would say the most important thing for people to know is that local people, most people are not that aware of local government, particularly in Montclair. I think there are a lot of people involved in national issues and to some extent state issues as well. But for that reason, we have a really low turnout in elections. I said the elections are held in May every 4 years. The entire council shifts at that point. So everyone is up, there's no staggered terms. In the last couple of elections, we've had a lot of the same people who've been in office for a long time reelected. When my slate was elected in 2008, there were a bunch of us who were basically mostly citizen advocates who got elected. And I would say, relatively speaking, it was a progressive government that got elected in our May elections, May 2008. But by the time July hit in 2008, the full impact of the economic downturn had come in. So basically 2008 to 2012 was a lot of basically our council having to downsize local government to meet the economic demands of the moment. So it was sort of an odd time. Since then, as I said, we've had a relatively stable group of people who are in government, but a very different flavor to government. And I'd say, so the things that are significant are the May elections, nonpartisan. We have a council manager form of government. So the council makes policy, basically like the board of directors for a nonprofit. But the professional manager, township manager is the name of the position. He basically is the CEO of the township. So he's the one who interacts with all the employees. So a council member or mayor can't say, oh, do this, do that. He's actually legally forbidden, or she is legally forbidden from interacting with staff, except for a few key positions, including township manager, township attorney, clerk, and also related to judge, prosecutor, defender. So it's actually the people vote by choosing their policymakers, and the policymakers choose and advise a professional manager. And as I said, that form of government changed in 1980. Montclair has had a couple of different forms of government, and each county and each municipality in Montclair, there are 565 municipalities, they have different forms of local government. Montclair's government has been particularly representative of the interests of single-family homeowners. And what most people don't know is about 45% of residents of Montclair are renters. Renters rarely vote in their first election because it takes so long to figure out what our form of government is. But also, I would say rarely vote in any of our elections. And turnout in the May elections is horrible. I led a movement back about, when I was still mayor, but trying to change the elections to November. That was legally permissible. The mayor after me said that he would put that on the ballot for the voters to decide, but that never happened. And very few people who get elected by one system decide to change the system. So that wasn't really terribly surprising. So I think those are the main things. The other thing I'd say is really significant is that the mayor chairs the governing body, the council, and has a couple of unique roles within the administration. But the very most important thing the mayor does is choose the school board. Very few places in the country and very few places in New Jersey have a mayor appointed school board. And I'm in favor of that, although my feelings about that have changed because of things that have happened over the last couple of terms. So I think those are the main things. Corruption looks different here than it does in other places because of our nonpartisan government. And hackery looks different, I would say. As you can imagine, Montclair is a Democratic stronghold. I think we voted 83% for Obama or so or more. And as a result, the power is strongly held by Democrats. And there's a system of corruption that I think is frankly horrible, and that leads to bad governance throughout the county and the state. And Montclair is a little bit outside of that, but as I said, it feels a little different in Montclair because those influences are still there. So you have a lot of situations where members of the council or even mayor get jobs working for the county, and lo and behold, are making lots of money in a county job by virtue of having power locally. I know I've dumped a lot of
Sure,
things.
this is really helpful.
I have a
there's so much more. There's so much more. But just whatever specific things might jump out as questions from that.
I have a quick question. It's actually kind of for Loon and for Jerry. So it is really unique that the elections are in May, right, and not in the fall. Like Loon, did you know that?
Only in recent years. So we've been here for 3.5, but like Jerry was saying, like our first year being here, it took a bit of time to really understand the different, because it's a totally different rhythm. And so, it kind of was like, how do we find that out? Like, how do we inform people? I think even with other friends who are tenants, just being in conversation about that helped. But if you don't have that, or if you're busy, I mean, there's so much going on. It was definitely, it's a totally different rhythm than like that presidential cycle and state cycle, like he was talking about.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm curious, obviously we're not gonna solve all of this on a Zoom call, but I think it's such an important problem that we're bringing up, that kind of the first stage of like electing people that you want to be in power is knowing when to vote, like at the most basic level, like when and where to go. And I feel like there's a really cool opportunity there for citizens or local government to, have a really great campaign around that.
And actually, if I could just add, like this last election, this mail-in election that we had in May was the highest voter turnout in a municipal election ever.
Wow.
And that makes a huge difference. Just to give you a general example, when I was elected, I think about 6,500 people voted, just somewhere south of 7,000 people voted. The election right after the election, then it was the election that I didn't run again, and Mayor Jackson was elected, and that was kind of a regular, similar election, except for well, it wasn't, the turnout was not great, but the main thing was there were not a whole lot of candidates. But then 4 years after that, there was virtually no candidates. There were only 8 people running for 7 seats, and the turnout was somewhere around 3,000 out of a town of 39,000. So you have to understand that your lack of involvement or understanding of things is pretty common. And also we have a long way to go before we have anything resembling democracy in Montclair. I know that's sort of a bold thing to say, but basically if you feel out of touch with your government, I can say that that's sort of, in a way, it's been by design, because what happened over the 8 years after I left is a lot of the committees and commissions and boards, which are those non-elected groups, appointed groups that advise the governing body. The role of those has been severely diminished, and you probably haven't heard, oh, come join the Environmental Commission or the Human Rights Commission, or put in an application to serve on the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. You haven't heard those things because there has not been a strong effort to get people involved in them. And I would say for anybody on this call, those are really the places where, if you're interested in a particular area of government, please go to the township website, find out a little bit about them, or you can just call me or reach out to anybody you know who's been involved in any elections in Montclair, and they can tell you about those groups. And that's a really good way to get involved in, if you're thinking you want to help and run for office. I originally was just running as a council member. I became a mayoral candidate pretty much by accident, because I had associated myself with another candidate who dropped out, and I thought I had a good chance of, out of the group that I was running with, of getting elected. But there's a lot of different ways to be in government, and we really need more people to really get involved locally. And so many of the issues that we have in town are not only unsolved and unaddressed, they're not really a subject of public discussion among members of the council. I can say that because during the years 2008 to 2012, there was a lot of citizen involvement, although I'd say a lot of it was outrage at increasing taxes and decreasing services, which is along with what happened 2008 to 2012.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up this part of the conversation, but thank you so much, Mayor Freed. This has been really interesting. We really appreciate you joining us. And I neglected to say that maybe for our upcoming conversation, we do invite viewers to submit their questions. You could do that if you're watching the live chat in the upper right corner of your screen. There's a place you could put your questions or comments. So before we leave, Mayor Freed, did you say you wanted to mention a website of something you're involved with?
Well, if anybody's interested in some ideas about the future of Montclair, a bunch of us put on this event called the Montclair Future Forum. This was 4 years ago. I'm sorry, this was 8 years ago. This was leading up to the municipal election and trying to get candidates to weigh in on it. So if you Google Montclair Future Forum, there's a Facebook page and the presentations are archived there. And there's some national leaders in planning, environmental, transportation, community development, housing. Those types of things are at that website. And I'd say if anybody's interested, please go there and check out some of the presentations. They're not great videos, but you can, and everything is Montclair specific, even though they're national experts. So it's pretty helpful just if you get a sense of things. And I'm reachable also via whatever social media or other things. If anybody has any more questions, because we didn't obviously get very, very far along the path to understanding Montclair's government in just a few minutes.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard in such a short time, but at least I think we covered the very basics anyway. So thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Loon, for your question. I think this has been an important question on many people's minds and very insightful. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and Loon, if you want to start an election awareness in Montclair project.
Yes, I know, right? That's what I'm
thinking. You should totally do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. Awesome. This was great. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you to both of you. So we are going to move on to our second segment now. And our question asker is Simon, who's actually in Montclair. He's in Bloomfield, but he has a question that is also kind of involving Montclair and other towns in the area. Simon, thanks for joining us. And what's your question?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I live in Bloomfield. I run the Bloomfield Information Project. We're a nonprofit public service news organization. Really curious about what's happening in town and how it got to be the way it is. And one of the things that I wonder about is Bloomfield's borders. We are 5 miles long and about a mile wide at our skinniest point, I guess you could say. And it's a town of 50,000, so it's an interesting shape. And I know that there were a lot of developments in the early 1800s about towns seceding from one another and incorporating on their own, if that's the right term, those are the right terms. So I'm really interested in finding out more about that, finding out more about Bloomfield's borders, Montclair's borders, Glen Ridge's borders. How did this area and the towns we know today develop?
That's a great question. And to help answer your question, we have Mike Farrelly, who is the town historian for Montclair. And people say, well, why? It's a question starting off about Bloomfield, why Montclair? But I guess as we'll learn, the histories of all these towns are very much intertwined. So Mike Farrelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, guys. Hi, Simon. Mayor Freed is interested in the future of Montclair. I personally am interested in Montclair's history. That is my passion.
You need to know the history to go forward to the future, right?
Totally, yeah.
I am officially the township historian. Now, people often wonder if they could get rid of me and save money on their taxes. Township historian is a totally volunteer job. I don't have an office. I don't have stationery. I don't have business cards. I don't cost you anything. Trust me. Getting rid of me, the tax is going to stay the same. When I walk around Montclair, I don't live in Montclair right now. Right now I live in Clifton, but I lived in Montclair for 39 years. And I'm back in town all the time. And when I walk around Montclair, I look at things with, look to see what was there. You know, I'm not always looking at what is there. I'm looking at what was there. And I started to put a little bit of a presentation together when I knew these were going to be the questions that were asked. I am adding a little bit. I know that wasn't a question that was asked to me, but I am fascinated by the relationship between the Dutch and the English that goes back in Montclair's history. And if you don't mind, I'm going to put a little PowerPoint up and see if I can explain a little bit about that and see if I can answer Simon's question.
Sure, we don't have a ton of time, but yeah, we can start with the history of the Dutch and tell us, I guess, what the original Bloomfield was like. Yeah.
Yes, I'll be quick. All right, 1609, Henry Hudson discovers the Hudson River. He is English, but he was working for the Dutch and he claimed the Hudson River and the area around it for the Dutch. Come on. Let's see if I can get this screen to move forward. There. The Dutch claimed everything from Connecticut to Delaware, and they called it New Netherland. They called their capital New Amsterdam. In September of 1664, a fleet of English warships sailed into New Amsterdam harbor. They had way more soldiers than the Dutch had. The Dutch had used up most of their gunpowder, and they only had about 150 people they could call soldiers. So the Dutch gave up New Netherland without a shot. The English renamed New Amsterdam. They called it New York. The first English governor of New Jersey was Philip Carteret, and he wanted people to move here. So he started offering land at very, very cheap rates. At that time, you had to negotiate with the English government, and you had to negotiate with the Lenni Lenape, the Native Americans who lived in the area. You had to do both things, but if you could pull that off, you could own a fair chunk of land in this area. A group of Puritans from the New Haven, Connecticut, were very unhappy about the treatment of their colony, which was called the New Haven Colony. So they approached Governor Carteret and asked for land, and they landed in Newark Bay in 1666. Took them a year to negotiate with the Native Americans, the Lenni Lenape, but they ended up buying a huge chunk of New Jersey, which is now Essex County. And that is also when the Dutch owned New Jersey, but they very rarely lived there. Actually, when the English took over, there were only about 50 houses in all of New Jersey. You know, if you can imagine that, a time when there weren't that many houses. When Philip Carteret offered the land, that's when the Dutch started pouring into New Jersey, and they came in from the north. They lived up around Tarrytown, and they started moving south, and that is why you see the old Dutch houses in Paramus and in Bergen County, and then you start to see them in Clifton and places like that. They came south. The English families who were based in Newark started moving north. The Dutch families moved south. In Montclair, the dividing line was Watchung Avenue. And that explains why the cultures of Montclair and Upper Montclair started out different. And they really were different cultures. The Dutch spoke Dutch. They didn't speak English. They lived a different lifestyle. So that is kind of how Upper Montclair came to be a little bit different than Lower Montclair. This is the original purchase of Newark. The rose-colored section is the city of Newark proper. The yellow-colored section is the rest of the area that they bought That's how much land they bought. They bought thousands of acres from the Native Americans. They had to give some of it to Union County. That's the lower triangle. The blue section, which includes Montclair, they purchased in 1677. And about 10 years later, they bought land at the top of the mountain. That's the white section of this map. And the boundaries of Newark at that time were about the same as the boundaries of Essex County today. In 1806, the city of Newark was divided into 3 wards. And the reason for this was mostly religious. The original settlers of Newark were strict Puritans, and they formed a congregational church. As the population increased, as they had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they were not as strict. They were not as interested in such a strict religion. They wanted churches of their own. Also, it was very hard. If you lived far away from Newark, the only churches were in Newark, and you had to walk or take a wagon ride into Newark. So that's when Newark broke up into wards. The western part of the county was technically part of Newark. It was known as Horseneck. That's the white section on that map. They were affiliated almost as much with Morris County as they were with Essex County. So really they didn't consider themselves part of Newark, even though technically they were. And it was divided up into Caldwell and to Livingston. And of course, since then it's divided up into lots more sub-communities, Cedar Grove, Verona, Caldwell, North Caldwell, tons of smaller communities. Orange, the ward of Orange incorporated into a township almost immediately. They incorporated in 1806. Bloomfield split from Newark in 1812. Bloomfield at the time included Montclair, what was to become Montclair, what was to become Glenridge, and what was to become Belleville. The Belleville part of Bloomfield included what is now the Woodside section of Newark and the town of Nutley. In 1839, Belleville split from Bloomfield. Now that was also a religious reason. There were quite a few Dutch people who lived in Belleville, and they were not interested in either the Congregational churches in Newark or the Presbyterian churches in Bloomfield. They wanted to form their own Dutch Reformed churches. So Belleville split from Bloomfield. Franklin split from Belleville in 1874. In 1902, I put down 1906, that is a typo, sorry. In 1902, Franklin became Nutley, and Nutley was named for a large estate. The Shatherwaite family owned a huge estate along the Passaic River, and that became the name of the town. In 1871, Belleville split off Woodside, which actually existed as an independent town for a while, but in 1914, Woodside and Forest Hill became part of Newark. They were annexed by the city of Newark. And the final town, well, not the final town, but another town that split from Bloomfield is Glenridge. And the reason they split is because they thought they were being ignored by the township of Bloomfield. Whenever they asked for roads or sewers, basically nothing happened. The town of Bloomfield considered Glenridge, they called it, this is a quote, on the hill. And they really didn't, the town fathers of Bloomfield didn't seem to care very much about Glenridge. So in 1895, Glenridge split from Bloomfield. Now we're going to talk about my favorite subject, Montclair. In 1852, a couple businessmen got together. They formed a railroad. It was finished by 1857, and you can see that it is the yellow line there. This is the original station is on the left, and the new station was built in 1911. That's the station that's there now. That was the Pig and the Prince, most recently. The guy who designed it, William Hull Botsford, received quite a bit of praise for his work, and he decided to celebrate by taking a cruise on the biggest and safest ship ever built, the Titanic.
Oh no.
Yes. So William was one of the people who went into the drink in 1912. Okay, Montclair was called West Bloomfield, and people often got mixed up between Bloomfield and West Bloomfield. Mail was delivered to the wrong places, and people often bought wrong tickets, did the wrong ticket to the wrong place. So the citizens of West Bloomfield decided to do something about it. They had a town vote in 1860 where they decided they were going to call themselves Eagleton, but the vote was not binding. The name Claremont was one of the choices that they talked about. They decided they didn't like it because several other American cities had the name Claremont. So a guy by the name of Julius Pratt suggested that they switch the syllables. And there was a petition created late in 1860 where the majority of people decided to call the town, the new town, Montclair. The name was changed at the post office and at the train station, but still we were technically part of Bloomfield. We were a legal subdivision of Bloomfield. Julius Pratt, the same guy who suggested the name Montclair, decided he didn't like the old railroad. He wanted to start a new one. So he got a charter for the new railroad, and he found a company, the New York and Oswego Midland Railroad, that was willing to build a railroad for the town of Montclair. He got the right to issue bonds. People in West Bloomfield were all for it. They actually wanted another railroad that went, it was too far for them to go every day, to go into Montclair Center, to one and only railroad station. They wanted other railroad stations spread throughout the town, so they were all for another railroad. The citizens of Bloomfield were not interested. They were very happy with the railroad they had. And when the citizens of Bloomfield showed that they weren't interested, it became very hard to raise money for the new railroad. So a committee was formed to explore separation from Bloomfield. And this is the last slide. In April of 1868, the independent township of Montclair came into existence. All right.
So basically, thank you. That was really interesting. So basically, the Bloomfield that we know today is basically what's left over after all these other towns and municipalities split off from the original Bloomfield.
That is absolutely correct. The Bloomfield that you know today was much bigger a long time ago.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere the original Bloomfield was like over 20 square miles, and now it's like a quarter of that size, much smaller, a shell of what it once was. So that was really fascinating. What do you think, Simon?
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I want to make a cute joke about how leftovers are always best or something to rep Bloomfield. I can't come up with anything, but laugh anyway. Thanks.
Mike, you need a YouTube channel. Seriously, it was so interesting, and the images and the pictures of the maps are amazing. Where do you find those?
Well, they're all on the internet. I mean, a lot of them, When I started out as a historian, this is back in the old days, I used to have to go all over the state looking for books in libraries. Of course, you know, we're talking about the 1980s, 1990s. Since then, everything's on the internet now. I can sit in my chair and do stuff that I used to have to go into a car and drive 20 miles, you know, to find.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's interesting to hear about the name Montclair coming from Claremont. I feel like whenever you see towns that have been established for so long, you kind of assume they're named after someone or there's some historical reason, and it was really kind of like a marketing switch.
Yeah, it was a marketing switch, and it was designed, that railroad changed the complexion of Montclair, both of those railroads. Before that, it was just a farming community, very rural, couple farmers, that was it. The fact that those railroads came in now allowed businessmen from Newark and New York to live in Montclair and commute just the way they do now into the big city. And actually, believe it or not, they could get to, people in Montclair could get to New York almost as fast as they can now, back then. And so that's when Montclair switched from being a farm community to being the suburb that it is now.
I wonder what people from back then would think about the fact that now the railroads are combined. They're one railroad after all these years. Anyway, Mike, well, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating, and thank you for putting all that time and work into that slideshow. I think we all learned a lot. It's interesting, you grow up or you live in a place your whole life, but to actually know the history and what happened there in the past and look at old historical photos and maps, I find it incredibly fascinating. It just makes me, as I go about through my daily life, just see things in a totally different light. So it was really great. So thank you so much. And thank you, Simon, for asking your question.
Yeah, what a great question.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think we're a little bit over time here, so we need to wrap up the show for today. So thank you both. Thank you, Krystal, again, for joining me. It was great to have you Monday and again today. Where can people go to find out more about your group's work?
Yes. So I, in addition to loving New Jersey and teaching here, I run a small solar company called Grouphug Solar. So if anyone's interested, you can go to grouphugsolar.com, and we help people go solar in stylish and easy ways.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much again. This has been great. And to everyone else, tune in again tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel, for the last show in our series this week, where we'll answer a philosophical question from Ian, who asks, is environmentalism even possible if humans are part of the environment?
Ooh, I'm going to tune in.
Should be interesting. Okay, well, thank you so much to all of you. Hope to see you then.